I was 19, staying late at the college darkroom to develop some film for my photography class. The photography building, once a tobacco warehouse, was a dark, rickety hulk near some lonely railroad tracks in a little-traveled part of campus. I finished developing my film close to midnight and headed out, nervous as always to be alone at night in this deserted part of town. It was dark. Several of the streetlights around the parking lot were out, and the few that remained were phoning it in, putting out a weak, flickery light that did nothing to reassure me as I headed toward my car. I heard him before I saw him, a scrape of feet on asphalt. He said, "Hey, can you do me a favor?" I startled and dropped my keys. He mumbled an apology for scaring me. I noticed he was wearing a jogging suit and limping. "What do you need?" I said. He hobbled a step or two toward me. "I think I sprained my ankle. Could you take me to the ER?" The university hospital was a short distance down the road. I hesitated. The guy looked perfectly pleasant, and he did seem to be in pain. But I had recently finished a book about serial killer Ted Bundy, who lured some of his victims by pretending to have a broken arm and asking for their help carrying books to his car. When they leaned over to put his stuff in the passenger seat of his Volkswagen Bug, he knocked them unconscious with a crowbar and stuffed them inside. This scene played across my mind as I looked at the guy. It also occurred to me to wonder why the heck anyone would want to jog in this creepy part of town. "I'm sorry, I cannot do that, but I could call somebody for you. There is a phone in the photography building there." "There's nobody to call. I just moved here, I don't really know anybody. Can't you just drive me? It's right down Limestone Avenue." He leaned against a car and winced as he reached down to rub at his ankle. "I will call you an ambulance," I offered. "No, I can't afford that. I don't have health insurance. Can you just drive me? I will pay you $20. There was something in the way he said this last bit. Something wrong. Like that exercise in my acting class, where we had to recite "Mary Had a Little Lamb," as though we were delivering a tragic monologue or a furious rant. There was a tone rising up that did not quite match the words he was saying. A raw urgency that reached down inside me and hit the panic button hard. There was a moment of silence between us. "I cannot help you," I said. "I am leaving." I gripped my keys, slipping them between my fingers the way my mom had taught me, so I could use them as a weapon if he came at me. I kept my eyes on him as I speed walked the last few feet to my car. He watched me drive away, still leaning against that car, a flat expression on his face. Away from the dark parking lot, driving through campus with my music turned up. The fear faded. I started to feel a little guilty for leaving the guy there, although I knew I had done what my mom and dad would have wanted me to do. I was about to turn into my dorm parking lot when I realized I needed to pick up some stuff for breakfast the next morning, so I turned around and headed back in the direction I had come. About a minute down the road, my stomach clenched. There was the guy in the jogging suit, running along the sidewalk. His ankle was perfectly fine. Later that summer, 2 students at my college were attacked by those same railroad tracks. The girl survived, but her boyfriend died. The man who attacked them was a serial killer dubbed the Railroad Killer by police. He murdered dozens of people across several states, most of them near railroad tracks. I did not see his mugshot on TV until years later, but the picture broke me out in the same icy sweat I felt when I saw that guy running down the street. I can't be 100% positive, but my gut tells me I escaped a serial killer that night. So these incidents started about 6 years ago and went on for a couple of years. I used to be really into the music scene, going to shows and festivals every chance I got. This often meant meeting random people whose names I would forget 5 seconds later, and so on. As a result of being out in Atlanta nightlife so often, I got frequent friend requests on Facebook, and naive younger me blindly accepted them, assuming they were just people I had met at shows that I was too drunk or distracted to remember. One day, I got a message from someone named Eddie. His Facebook profile picture was of someone at least a decade older than me, with long, scraggly hair. He looked harmless enough, just another show-going hippie, I assumed. His message simply asked if I was the girl who danced a half circle around him at the local show last night, and then twirled dreamily away, or something along those lines. This was back in 2012, so I don't remember the exact words. I responded that I had no recollection of that, and upon further investigation, saw that he lived in an entirely different state, so it could not have been me. He said that I must have had a doppelganger out there somewhere, and I left the conversation at that. Over the next few months, I would get random notifications that he had messaged me, asking if I would be at various shows across the Southeast, and so on. I mostly ignored the messages, but would very occasionally respond, shortly expressing interest in a band he had mentioned, just trying to be polite. Why younger me felt the need to be polite to everyone is beyond me. I have since learned that it is okay not to respond to persistent internet strangers. The messages became more and more frequent, so I just started to leave them unread. Again, why I didn't block him is beyond me. I guess I thought he was just harmless and lonely. Fast forward about a year. It was summer of 2013, and two of my best friends and I were caravanning to Wakarusa, a music festival that took place in Ozark, Arkansas. It was about a 13-hour drive from Atlanta, but totally worth it. We went every year. An important note here is that this was not some small, intimate festival. It hosted upwards of 40,000 people, and it was often hard to keep track of my friends, let alone find people I knew who came separately. So my friends and I were on a blanket in the middle of a huge crowd, watching widespread panic. It was nighttime, so the only lights were coming from the stage. Random LED toys, glow sticks, or whatever. Out of nowhere, someone beelined for our blanket, made himself at home next to me without permission, and struck up a conversation. My group of friends was generally warm and accepting, and it was not unusual to make random friends at a big hippie fest like this, so we thought nothing of it at first. Probably just someone high on ecstasy and looking for company. It was not until he started referencing me in my Facebook personally that the alarm bells started going off. This was Eddie. I had honestly completely forgotten about him and his persistent messages, and in the darkness there was no way I could have recognized him. He was talking like I was an old friend and tried to follow us around all night. Once I subtly alerted the others about who he was, we made every excuse in the book to try to leave, go back to our campsite and call it a night. He was painfully insistent on following us back there and continuing to hang out. Obviously, I did not want him to know where I slept, so I tried to appease him by saying I was exhausted, but that we could try to meet up tomorrow. Again, dumb, I know. I was just doing anything I could to get him away in the moment, and had no intention of actually following through. He finally left us alone, and we walked a long roundabout way to our campsite just in case he had watched or tried to follow at a distance. The next day, I made an avid point to avoid the area where we ran into Eddie and discussed meeting up. The festival venue was huge, so I figured there was no way he would find me again. I was beside a small stage in the back corner of the venue, hooping in the woods with my friends, when I noticed him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing beside a tree alone, watching me with a weird smile. It reminded me of a proud dad watching his young daughter play, but with way creepier and more sinister overtones. Still, he had not done or said anything explicitly creepy or threatening, but his presence was so unsettling that I grabbed my friends and we pretended that we had forgotten about a set that was starting, so we ran out of the wooded stage area. I remember hoping he did not notice I'd seen him. The festival ended the next day and I was relieved not to see him again. Fast forward about another year. At this point, I barely used Facebook and had all but forgotten about Eddie. My friend that I went to the festival with was visiting from out of town that night, and we were going to get some drinks. He got to my house and we were catching up, and the subject of the festival came up. We started talking about Eddie and how weird that whole situation was, but at this point it was less creepy and more of just a strange memory. I told him Eddie used to message me all the time, but that I had stopped opening them years ago. Naturally, my friend wanted to look through the messages, so I obliged. We began to scroll through the messages and I realized just how dire of a mistake it may have been not to block him. He had started by asking me what shows I was going to go to, what part of Atlanta I lived in, and so on, not taking the hint that I clearly had no interest in responding at that point. Then as the months went by, he was sending me links to tickets he had bought for me to shows in Atlanta, and then links to tickets he had bought for us to go to together. There was one message asking where he could pick me up for a show that was 2 hours away in Athens, and that he couldn't wait to see me again. The messages continued to go on, but at this point I was so creeped out I immediately blocked him, finally, and closed the computer wide-eyed. What the actual hell? He sounded like he was carrying on an entire relationship with me without my consent. He never acknowledged the fact that I literally had not responded to or even seen a message from him in over a year. Shaken up, we decided to just go get a drink and stop thinking about this weirdo. We got to Edgewood, a popular bar district in my city, and walked to our favorite small bar to get a drink. As soon as we walked into the bar, my heart sank to the pit of my stomach. To this day, this was the creepiest and most coincidental moment that has ever happened. I saw Eddie sitting at the far end of the bar. His face lit up as soon as I walked in, and he motioned me over. He said something along the lines of, "I can't believe it's you," and started firing off questions about me, my life, what I had been up to, and so on. At this point, the darkest feeling washed over me. I just felt unsafe and exposed. Why was he here? He didn't even live in Georgia. I quickly told him I had to use the restroom, but that I would be back to the bar for a drink. I grabbed my friend, equally in shock, and we speed walked around the corner to the bathrooms and then right on past them. I will forever be grateful that the door to the patio area was just past the bathroom, so we got a head start. We got outside, hopped the fence, and started running to my car. I glanced behind us, and Eddie somehow figured out in those 15 seconds that we left, even though you cannot see the bathrooms from where he was sitting, and he was walking rapidly across a crosswalk in our direction, eyes on me. We booked it to my car and got the hell out of Edgewood as quickly as we could. Shaken, I drove us around for about an hour before eventually going home to make sure we were not being followed. As inconclusive as the whole thing was, that was the last time I ever saw Eddie, and I often wonder if this was just a string of coincidences or if it was more sinister. After all, he didn't even live in Georgia. Why was he at one of my favorite bars alone, the night I happened to go through all his old messages? Had he somehow gotten a hold of my location via Facebook? I made sure all my location services were off when I checked my phone, so to this day I have no idea how he ended up there or what his intentions were. But regardless, Eddie, let's please not meet again. My name is Nolan, and I am 24 years old now, but when all this happened, I was just 12. I live not far from Paris, but I have loved traveling since I was a kid. For 5 summers straight, from 2009 to 2013, my mom signed me up for summer camps every July. Those camps were amazing. I traveled all over France, camping, hiking mountains, doing caving and rope courses. So many fun activities since I was young, and I loved every minute of it. Then came 2013, which turned out to be the worst year of my life and the last time I went to camp. That summer, the camp was on Ile d'Oléron, an island in western France connected to the mainland by a big bridge. The island is known for being really hot in the summer. Amazing local food, nice beaches, and especially a famous monument called Fort Boyard, an old prison in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that once held criminals. The camp was set in the middle of nature. Imagine a group of small buildings arranged in an L shape. On one side was the entrance, and on the other was just thick bushes leading into the forest. The buildings were divided between the kids' dorms, the laundry room, the dining hall, and the instructors' dorms. At that time in my life, I was pretty rebellious and didn't like to listen. 2 of my friends, Malik and Enzo, came with me. So we were all set for a crazy time. Maybe too crazy. Everything was fine during the first 6 days of camp, and we had so much fun. But on the 7th day, things started going wrong, mostly because of us. That night, we had a campfire game session, playing board games like Uno from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. After that, the instructors announced lights out, and everyone went to their rooms. Malik, Enzo, and I shared a room, so we brushed our teeth and went to bed. About 25 to 30 minutes later, the instructors turned off all the lights. Around midnight, I came up with a terrible idea. A night walk in the forest with my 2 friends, even though we were only 12 or 13 years old. We opened our window, looked around quickly, and saw that none of the instructors were awake. They were all asleep, probably too tired after the day's activities. We quietly crossed the camp courtyard, sneaking past the buildings, and entered the bushes on the far side of the site. We walked about 10 to 15 minutes into the forest. While walking, I was joking around and trying to scare my friends with creepy stories. Suddenly, we arrived at the fence of an old abandoned house. The house looked really run down and creepy, like something out of a witch's story. Being young and dumb, we decided to at least go into the garden. To our surprise, the gate was open, so we stepped inside. As soon as we started walking in the garden, we heard a huge, loud scream coming from a man with a deep, scary voice. We were so scared that at first, we couldn't even understand what he was yelling. And then the front door of the house under the porch opened, and we saw a man running towards us. We panicked, nearly crying, and instantly reopened the gate behind us. We ran as fast as we could back toward the camp. We managed to get back and woke everyone up in the middle of the night. So stressed, scared, and panicked that I was crying a lot. The instructors obviously scolded us for being reckless and dangerous, but it was clear from our faces that we weren't making it up. We told them what happened and finally went back to our rooms. I couldn't sleep at all that night and kept replaying the scene in my head. One detail stuck with me thanks to the moonlight. The man limped and had a wooden leg, but even so he ran really fast. I don't know why, but I had a very bad feeling about the whole thing. I wish that had been the end of the story, but no. On the 9th day, the last day of camp, we were outside doing various activities when the instructor asked if we had our swimsuits ready because we were going to the pool. I said no and that I needed to go get mine from my room, so I ran alone to the dormitory about 10 meters away. I opened my door, then closed it behind me for some reason without turning on the light. Inside the room, since we had the shutters closed, it was almost completely dark. but some little holes let in a bit of moonlight. At that moment, about 5 meters from me, I saw a tall human-like figure standing still. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. I didn't understand what was happening, but I was frozen and couldn't move. What felt like an eternity, probably just 5 or 6 seconds, I suddenly turned, opened the door, and ran outside screaming that someone was in my room. I ran crying towards the center of the camp where everyone was. An instructor immediately went with some colleagues to check my room, but it was empty. Suddenly, the instructors called everyone to come to my room because they found something terrifying. On the floor was a piece of paper with the words, "I will come back tonight," written on it. I literally froze and cried twice as much as before. That night, the instructors stayed in pairs outside every door so nobody could enter any rooms. Thankfully, no one came back to my room that night. We left camp the next day, but because of those incidents, I never went back to camp after I was 13. It took me a long time to want to travel again with friends or family to places I didn't know. It wasn't until I was 19 that I dared to go on vacation again. When I told my mom about what happened, she told me I was incredibly stupid and brave at the time for my age, and that I did the right thing because whoever was in my room that night didn't mean well, especially with that note left behind. But honestly, going in the forest was so freaking stupid. Like, I don't know why we went in that forest, to be honest. Even 12 years later, questions still haunt me. What the actual hell was that person in my room? Was it the same man who chased us in the forest? What did he want? And how did he find my room? These questions kept me awake many nights, and I had a lot of nightmares. Like I said at the start, even if I mostly laugh about it now, sometimes I still get anxious over small things. So to the man in the woods who chased us and then appeared in my room, let's never meet again. I live in a farming area, and there are a lot of fields and woodland, so it's not a hard place to find somewhere to walk my dogs off their leads. About 2 years ago, one evening, I had completely forgotten to walk them. It was about 8:30 and it was in October, so it was already dark. But I wasn't too bothered because I know the whole area really well. So I took my large female boxer dog, who was only a puppy at the time but had insane muscle and was already fully grown in height, and my Chihuahua cross Jack Russell out. I'm a 5'5" girl with quite a bit of muscle on me because I did a lot of physical sports including martial arts, so I could easily protect myself in a fight. Because of this, I thought I didn't need a torch and thought I was safe. I began walking out of my estate and up a hill with my earphones playing some heavy metal music to get me in the zone for a quick walk on the back fields and then back home. When I reached the top of the hill, which led to another housing estate bordering the fields, I noticed there was no traffic at all. No movement. At this point it was almost 9 o'clock, and there was nobody to be seen, which I thought was unusual because it's a well-populated area. Besides this, I carried on walking, with my little crossbreed biting at the lead with excitement, and my boxer trying to attack my shadow. Once we reached the fields, it was almost pitch black. There were no lampposts. The only light was from the houses that faced the field. I took my boxer off her lead, and as boxers do, she bounded off into the tall grass like a child, whereas my little mutt followed my heels, nipping my jeans to remind me he was still there. After about 5 minutes, my eyes had adjusted to the lighting of the field, and I could see my boxer had stopped a meter ahead of me, staring at something. Instantly, my Jack Russell Cross started growling and stood between my legs. I looked up to see a figure standing around 3 meters away from me. I shouted for my boxer to come back to me, As usually, she gets too friendly with strangers and jumps up on them. Reluctantly, she turned to me and began running back, my eyes never leaving the figure. I called out and apologized for my dogs. I think I said something like, "Sorry, she's only a pup, she thinks everybody wants to play." Nothing, just silence from the figure. I could see that they had long hair and what looked like a long raincoat on. The shoulders were wide. However, I still think it was a woman. Once again, I called out to her, "Are you okay? Did she jump up on you?" Again, nothing. At this point, I could feel her eyes on me and my dogs. My littlest dog began barking and squealing, and my boxer started barking this horrifying bark I've never heard her produce. It sounded like she was trying to threaten the figure. Then I heard the woman begin laughing malevolently. That's when I lost it. I picked up my little dog and ran, knowing full well my boxer would follow me. Like I said earlier, I do a lot of sports, so I'm fast and don't have too bad stamina. Jumping over the gate with my dog in my arms and my boxer right behind me, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the woman clear as day in full pursuit. I couldn't give you exact details, but all I can tell you is she looked like something straight out of a horror movie. She was grotesque in every sense of the word. At this point, my boxer was running just a little ahead of me. She knew I was running home and that this woman was bad news. She could have bolted, but for whatever reason, she kept a speed that matched mine. Maybe it's the dog's loyal instinct of the pack or something, I don't know. Anyway, by the time I reached the end of the first estate, I slowed to look behind me. Big mistake. There she still was, running. Quite a distance behind me, but she was coming. At this point, my head was complete mush. But I knew if I went down the route I came from to the field, she would catch up to me. So I darted to the left at the end of the estate and ran across the road down the street, my boxer right by my side. At this point, my mutt had gone silent and was digging his paws into my arm and chest. I ran like I've never run before. At the end of the street, I turned right, which brought me onto a street next to the opening of my estate. I didn't look behind me until I reached my driveway. I put my mutt down and he ran with my boxer to the front door of my house. I looked behind me. She wasn't there, but I could hear her laughing. So I ran to the door, opened it, and slammed it behind me, then bolted it. I turned the porch light off and peered out the little window of the door. She walked straight past the end of my driveway. She hadn't seen me. I told my older sister what happened. She told me it was best we didn't tell our dad, as he probably wouldn't let me walk them alone again. Ever since that night, I rarely forget to walk my dogs before it gets dark out, and when I do, I walk them first thing in the morning after. So, scary lady in the farmer's field, let's not meet again. This happened to me around a year ago and it still haunts me. At the time, I was a 25-year-old female visiting some friends. It was the middle of the week, but I was on vacation, so I stayed out late. Around 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the morning, I got in my car to head home, which is about a 30-minute drive. I live in a small German town on a main street, but it's not very big. At night during the week, there's barely any traffic. Maybe 1 or 2 cars every now and then, that's it. A bit of context that might help. Coming from the direction I drove, you can see down the road for quite a while. Maybe 600 to 700 meters, which is something around 2,000 feet. I rent a parking spot in an underground garage shared with 10 other tenants. The garage entrance is tucked away beside the building and somewhat hidden by the surrounding houses. It isn't really visible unless you're standing right in front of it. Anyway, back to the story. I was driving home on a typical spring night. Everything was normal. I pulled into the driveway and stopped for a moment to open the garage door with my remote. Then I backed into my parking spot, which faces the entrance. I left the engine running as I rummaged in the center console. I can't even remember what for. Suddenly, when I looked up, there was a stranger standing there. A man, maybe 45 years old, about 3 meters. That's around 10 feet in front of my car inside the garage, just staring at me. I was instantly terrified. Reflexively, I hit the lock button on my car. He shouted that I should give him my phone, saying his car had broken down and he needed to make a call. But I hadn't seen any broken down car or flashing hazard lights anywhere on the road. No car pulled over. Nothing. I was so frozen in shock that I just stared at him. He seemed to notice how confused I was. He added that the breakdown happened in the next town, which, by the way, is about an hour's walk away. Again, he told me to give him my phone, becoming louder and more aggressive. That's when I realized what he was not wearing. Just knee-length checkered shorts and no shirt. It wasn't freezing outside, but it definitely wasn't warm enough to be standing around half naked. I yelled through the closed window that I couldn't help him and asked him to leave. He, still angry, said, "You don't need to be afraid of me, just come and give me your phone." I told him I was sorry, but no, and that he needed to leave. He stared for a moment longer, then angrily walked out of the garage. I stayed in my car until the garage door was fully closed. Only then did I turn off the engine. I wanted to call a friend, but there's no reception in that garage. So I grabbed my keys and every bit of courage I had and sprinted to the door leading into the apartment hallway. It's a heavy door that jams sometimes. Thankfully, not that night. There's also a back entrance from outside to the garage, and I had no idea if that door was locked or if the man knew about it. Once inside, I ran to my ground floor apartment. The windows are somewhat shielded by a hedge leading to my terrace, but technically, it's still reachable from the street. Once inside, I locked everything, shut all the blinds, and just sat there for several minutes before calling a friend. I debated calling the police but didn't, thinking they had more urgent matters to deal with since actually the man hadn't done anything to me. Looking back, I realized that was a mistake. But honestly, I was just completely rattled. I'm usually someone who's happy to help people, but he easily could have asked me to call someone from outside, or knock on a door somewhere, or anything other than following a young woman into a garage at night, half naked. That's just no. I've never seen him again, thankfully, but ever since that night, I hate parking there. I never get out of my car until the garage door is fully closed, and even then I'm always on edge. I'm so grateful I kept the car running and locked the doors. I'm grateful my parking spot is right across from the entrance, so I had a clear view. I'm grateful the door didn't stick that night. And honestly, I'm so grateful I hadn't gotten out of the car earlier. I really don't want to imagine what could have happened if I had.